George, after Morgan Parker. George loves pizza. George stroked a tiger. George likes his girls girly and will tell you that he's tall. George isn't looking for anything serious. George knows this amazing little place by the river. George had his bum out on a cliff once. George, if you like cheese, then you'll love him. George is a cheeky chappie. George likes his women funny. George usually goes for blondes, but George has this thing for brunettes. George will kiss you on the forehead and make sure you get home safe. George doesn't pay rent. George got played on BBC Radio 6 at 4 a.m. George says, fair play. George says his ex was a model. George loves curves. George calls you his sweet vanilla latte. George's best friend is Nick from the micro-brewery. George paid someone to put together his eco-friendly urban wall garden, but has a diesel engine. George beckons over the waitress. George calls her honey. George tips her 20 and makes sure you see it. George calls the bouncer buddy. George keeps saying, nice guy. George calls his mummy and you know that she won't like you. George's ex sold ice cream from a wheelbarrow. George's ex dressed up like a schoolgirl. George thinks it's really sexy when girls read. George calls the place you were born in a little bit of a shithole. George has so much money. You'd like to take George's money and buy him some socks. George gets cross when they're out of Almond Croissants because he rang ahead and has cycled all the way from Putney. George drives you crazy when you don't hear from him in 3 weeks, even though the last time you did he drunk dialed you from the Chinese restaurant on the Strand and told you that he thought he might love you. George might be dead. George keeps the book of plays you gave him next to his bed. George has this little gold pen with his initials on. George gets back in touch. George insists you meet his parents. George dresses you up in his stepmom's Barbour coat and hat and calls you a cutie. George's dad taps your bum at the bar like it's 1950. George says you can really pull that look off. That is just his dad's way.